Hi there. I think I'm live. Am I live? I think so. So there's a question from Jeffrey Tretton who says, did you find any books that surprised you as having a romantic lesson? I think a lot of the books that we wrote about surprised me, but one of the first ones that comes to mind is Moby Dick, which most people don't think of as having, most people, I think, probably don't realize that there's any romantic subplot, and the romantic subplot in Moby Dick is pretty slender. They don't spend a lot of time on the romantic subplot, but the romantic subplot in Moby Dick involves Captain Ahab's young wife, who he weds. He sort of says very evocatively that he leaves a single dent in the pillow, so he sort of stays with her one night, and then he goes out to sea and starts hunting whales again, back to his obsession. And I felt like the lesson in Moby Dick was, men who are obsessed with achieving some kind of goal, like Captain Ahab was. We tend to tell ourselves, okay, he's really busy right now, he's really obsessed with his career right now, but that'll change if I just hang in there. Things will get better. I'll have more attention from this person that I'm in love with. And I think the fact is that for the most part, save for some kind of dramatic intervention or some kind of dramatic breakdown, people who are obsessed with their careers don't really just suddenly say, okay, I finally, achieved the goal that I've been after, like killing Moby Dick. And now I'm just going to kind of chill out and relax and suddenly spend a lot of time with my family. So I guess that's a long way of saying that the lesson I saw, the romantic lesson I saw in Moby Dick was, workaholics are not the best people to marry, or to devote yourself to, because they are generally more obsessed with their careers and goals than they are with you. So there we go. Now we have another question from Jagged Otter. He asks, what book did you and Jack have the biggest disagreement about? Strangely enough, we had the biggest, I wish Jack were here to tag team with me right now. We had the biggest disagreement about Pride and Prejudice, actually, because Jack didn't really buy the idea that the main character, whose name is now escaping me, the lady of the story, he didn't really buy that she would start off hating Darcy and then actually be won over by the guy. And I thought that kind of happens a lot in life, especially like in high school, college, where women start off really disliking a guy, thinking he's kind of a jerk, thinking he is arrogant, doesn't pay us the kind of attention we'd like to be paid, and then suddenly we realize, okay, maybe, as in the case of Darcy, maybe this guy is just a little socially awkward. Maybe he's, a very good guy and well-intentioned, who sometimes, doesn't come off so well, or puts his foot in his mouth, or whatever it is. And I felt like Darcy really does show himself to be a very, caring, generous, considerate person. Yes, I recently had an encounter with someone who was so incredibly socially awkward that I was practically on the point of tears. And then the next time I saw him, he came over to me and apologized to me and was incredibly sweet. And so that's a mini example of me being won over by perhaps a Darcy type. Anyway, we had a big disagreement about that book. So let's see. Now we have another question from Mackenzie M. I don't know if I'm actually supposed to be saying everybody's name, but I don't know. I guess somebody can write in and tell me if I shouldn't be doing that. But Mackenzie asks, what type of research other than real life experiences did you have to conduct while writing this book? Well, we did a lot of reading, obviously, and a lot of rereading. I mean, all the books that we talked about, except for Sense and Sensibility, which I actually, except for Sense and Sensibility, and maybe even Pride and Prejudice, both of which I read, certainly Sense and Sensibility I read for the first time, maybe Pride and Prejudice, to prepare for this book. And we kind of felt like, well, Jane Austen is obviously the expert on these matters. She's the sort of go-to literary person when it comes to romance and relationships. But neither Jack and I were big fans of hers before we wrote this book. I became a big fan of hers. Jack is still, you know, he's still out with the jury on Jane Austen. So we read a lot, which was really fun for us. And then I guess the other kind of research that we conducted was just sort of talking to our friends about their romantic mishaps, their romantic questions, their favorite books about... We really only covered the books that we wanted to cover, but part of the fun of working on this book was getting into so many conversations about people's favorite books about love, or people's favorite novelistic insights into dating and romance. Anyway, Savvy Bookworm now has a question, and it is, which heroine from classic literature do you think we can learn the most from? The most, let's see. Well, the book Middlemarch comes to mind. I think partly not necessarily because we can learn. I feel like it's a loaded question. Which heroine can we learn the most from? Only because I think, you know, so many of us have different life experiences, and we kind of relate to or you know, feel similar to different kinds of characters, and those are the characters that we're probably going to be able to learn from. For me, Middlemarch is just like is a very long book with a very compelling main character, and I think there's plenty to learn from that. And you know, one of the lessons in Middlemarch, which we don't actually cover, is a book we don't actually cover in the book, partly because we felt the message or the lesson to be learned from Middlemarch was so straightforward that we didn't really have to tease it out. But the lesson there is, you know, you shouldn't marry a man just because you think he's a great man and he's an admirable man and he wants to accomplish worthy things and you want to help him accomplish worthy things. You should marry the person you feel comfortable with, attracted to, turned on by. I don't know. Actually, maybe that's a lesson that plenty of modern readers don't need to hear. But I think we do maybe need to hear that, you know, we don't necessarily need to go for the guy who seems to have worldly success or power, as to some extent the man whom Dorothea Brooke, I think that's the name of the main character in Middlemarch, the man who she marries is a minister, who seems to have, you know, worldly success, the respect of his peers, you know, plenty of power in the community, and the guy that she eventually ends up with, who's a painter, who's you know, who doesn't really have a very good income, doesn't make a lot of money, doesn't have a lot of sort of conventional power in the larger community, is the better person for her. And she's sort of hoping to feel fulfilled through, when she marries the minister, she's hoping she can feel fulfilled by helping him with his work. And when she marries the painter, she feels fulfilled by their relationship. You know, it's not a means to an end; it's an end in itself. And I think that's an important lesson to learn. I also feel like I could, you know, rattle off, I don't know, 6 other heroines who impart important lessons, but maybe we'll come back to that later. I like talking about my favorite heroines. People like, you know, I love Jane Eyre. I really love Margaret and Howard's End, but maybe we'll come back to them. I actually really feel for Queen Dido and Aeneas, but maybe we'll come back to that if we have some time later. So thanks for asking such a great question. Now there is a question from Joe Hauser, who says, how difficult was it to reconcile a male and female point of view when collaborating on a book about romance? This is a really good question. Also, I will just say kind of or tangentially here, just talking about male and female point of views. I'm reading this new novel that hasn't come out yet. It's coming out in, I think, June or July. It's called The Love Affairs of Nathaniel P. by Adele Waldman, and it's so fantastic and really just kind of hits the nail on the head when it comes to, modern day men and how they approach dating. And Adele is a woman who takes the point of view of a young, 30-year-old Harvard-educated male who's just gotten a book deal and lives in Brooklyn. And I am amazed and impressed by how effectively she kind of channels the voice of this character. And, I sort of feel like in this book, she gives Philip Roth, a run for his money. Jonathan Franzen doing the male narrator, Chip in the corrections is, she's, I'd say, just as good as Jonathan Franzen was in that book. And so, anyway, I think it's a feat. And that book is The Love Affairs of Nathaniel P., which I have not finished yet, but I think it's safe to say I recommend it, nonetheless. Let's see. So, sorry. So, to get back to the question, which is, how difficult was it to reconcile a male and female point of view when collaborating on this book? I would say that it was pretty easy to do so. Part of the genesis of this book, part of the reason we decided to write it is just because I felt like Jack had so many great, interesting insights, and I thought it was about dating and relationships, and I thought it was really fun that I would, go over to his place sometimes and be kind of lamenting my dating life, and he would say, oh, like, here, there's this great lesson that, in War and Peace that, you can, there's, if you just kind of figure out how the character Natasha conducts herself in War and Peace, like, then you'll never have a problem dating again. So it was just kind of I thought, a fun way to go about dating advice, to go about giving dating advice. So yeah, we didn't, and when I was reading, we also split things up. We each would sort of go book by book and chapter by chapter. So, I would talk about a certain book in one chapter, and then Jack would talk about another book in a different chapter. So we weren't really both, although we did weigh in from time to time on each other's observations, we weren't going head to head about every book that we covered. We weren't going head to head pretty much on any of the books that we covered. So yeah, and I mean, one of the insights from Jack that I loved when reading the book was his insight derived from Infinite Jest, and the chapter on Infinite Jest in our book is called Infinite Gesticulating. Why do men talk so much? And what Jack goes on to talk about in that chapter is basically, quote unquote, mansplaining. I don't know if you're all familiar with that term, but it's basically, a contraction of man and explaining. Mansplanations are, these moments when men just kind of, decide to hold forth and pontificate and don't give anyone else the floor, even you when they're just one-on-one with you on a date. They just kind of go off for 30 minutes about, I don't know, the price of oil or whatever, topic they've decided to read up about on Wiki that day. And, as Jack explains in his chapter, and I think women often are sitting on the other side of that on a date thinking, does he think I'm interested in this? Does he think I'm an idiot? Why is he being so rude as to not give me a chance to talk at all? Why is he hogging all the airspace? And as Jack points out in his chapter on Infinite Jest, a lot of the time, men are doing that because they're nervous and because they want to impress the person across from them, and they want to come off as, intelligent people. So that was one of the lessons that Jack talked about that I really enjoyed, because I've certainly had the experience of thinking, when is this guy ever going to stop talking? So now we'll go on to the next question. Robin F. asks, of all the books you considered in your research, which one has the most to offer to power couples of today? Balancing career and romance can be a big challenge for modern couples. That is an interesting question. I mean, we looked at most of the books we looked at were older books. I would say, let's see, I did talk about Bright Lights, Big City, and that was sort of an outlier. So there are not a lot of what you might call power couples in the books that we discussed. But Howard's End comes to mind in this instance, because that's a book with two very powerful, very strong-willed, very opinionated people who come together later in life. The main character is named Margaret, and now I forget what her husband's name is. He's this sort of very wealthy widower who's, kind of an uber capitalist, makes all of his money, basically exploiting people in Africa. I'm forgetting the exact details. I think it's like rubber or whatever it is that he's involved in. But, they both had very strong ideas about how to conduct themselves, what constituted family. He had very conservative ideas. She had much more liberal ideas. And it got, in the book, after a very intense moment in which Margaret's sister gets pregnant out of wedlock, which was, a pretty big deal back in the time when E.M. Forster was writing this book. I think it was like 1918 or something like that. So her sister gets pregnant out of wedlock. Her husband is just appalled by this and basically wants to sort of shun the sister. And then the husband's son is accused of manslaughter. So all of these pressures are sort of coming in on them, and they're about to kind of break apart when they realize basically that they both kind of really love each other and care for each other and need each other to get through these intense crises in their lives. And so they compromise. And, I think that that's probably a valuable lesson for power couples. I mean, we don't love to compromise. We don't want to, compromise career-wise. We don't want to compromise romantically. We don't want to give in, but I think the only way to really balance those two things is to compromise a lot and to empathize a lot too. I don't know. Anyway, I'll go on to the next question now. Mina DeCaro writes in to say, hi, and congratulations on the release of MAL, which is the first time our book has been acronymized, I think. MAAL, Much Ado About Loving. Exciting. Which one of the novels mentioned in your book is the one that taught you the biggest lesson about the ways of the heart? This is an interesting question. I would say maybe Howard's End. Or at least it has taught me the lesson that sort of has most impacted me in the last few years of my life. Because as I talk about in the chapter on The Bell Jar, Sylvia Plath's novel, Sylvia Plath, who, it was just the 50th anniversary of her death, unfortunately. As she talks about as I sort of talk about using the bell jar as my jumping off point, a lot of women don't really feel interested in the men who are interested in them, particularly when they're younger. I think for me, part of the reason I didn't feel interested in men who were interested in me, I think part of it had to do with, fears and guilt and uncertainty about sex. I was raised really strictly Catholic, and I kind of grew up believing that I would never have sex until marriage, essentially, until I found someone to spend the rest of my life with. So I had a lot of squeamish feelings about sex, and I think, part of my, let's say, repulsion, the part of the reason that I felt kind of repulsed by men who were interested in me when I was younger, I think had to do with this fear of sex. But it also had to do with a fear of intimacy and a fear of depending on someone and a fear of getting very close to someone who might end up, leaving you or dying. And, in the Bell Jar, Sylvia Plath's heroine, Esther Greenwood, her father dies when she's young, and I think that plays into her feeling of kind of repulsion, her distaste for any man who actually ends up liking her. I think it's connected to the trauma of losing her father and the desire not to go through that kind of trauma again, as you might, as you are kind of likely to if you get into a serious relationship with someone. I mean, most romantic relationships end up coming to a close, either through a breakup or through death. I guess all romantic relationships come to a close someday. So I think Esther was repulsed by men because she was it was a subconscious way of avoiding that kind of trauma again. I think that was true for me as well. My mother died when I was young, and I had a lot of other losses, and I think the idea of getting close to someone was very associated in my subconscious mind with trauma and with, sadness and tragedy. So there was that. And then, as I've gotten older and hopefully matured, I've started to sort of work against those instincts of mine, work against that kind of fear of intimacy and fear of getting close to people. And I think in Howard's End, there's a very important lesson to be learned, which is basically like it can work out pretty well when you decide you're going to go for the nice guy, which is what, even though he is kind of a capitalist, he's not the most admirable, let's say, business leader, the guy that Margaret ends up marrying in Howard's End, but he is very good to her and just treats her, like a queen, and I think, Margaret knows that this guy she's about to marry has very different political ideas from her political ideas. He conducts himself very differently from how she conducts herself. This guy is not gonna fit in with her friend group. Her friends and her family, whom she loves, basically don't like this guy. But she realizes, what, I want love. I want a relationship. I want someone to spend the rest of my life with. And even though this guy isn't perfect, he's very good to me. And she begins to feel that, she begins to notice that his love for her inspires love in her. Through his love for her, she starts to feel love for him. And I think that that's a really good lesson for people to learn. That a few years ago, that book came out by Lori Gottlieb called, I forget what it was. It was something like Settling for Mr. Wrong or something. The idea was sort of, don't keep looking for Mr. Perfect. Like it was something like Mr. Good Enough. Not Mr. Wrong. Like settling for Mr. Good Enough or something. And I feel like that's not a great way to say what she's trying to say. Why don't you go for Mr. Good Enough? But I think, what a book like Howard's End shows is that if you go into a relationship with someone who treats you well, even if he's not the perfect guy, if you go into it with good intentions, if you go into it wanting to return his love with your love, something beautiful can arise out of that, and it does in Howard's End. Anyway, sorry, I've totally gone off on Howard's End. I really love that book. Okay, Now we have another question from Jagged Otter. I hope I'm answering these questions satisfactorily and in a way that feels fun for you guys. Jagged Otter says, the chapter titles were so hilarious. How did you think of them? We just, got kind of silly and went off. I think one of the first, the first chapter title we came up with maybe was Moby Dick Heads, Why Workaholics and Other Obsessives Are Bad News. So I think, that kind of set the tone, and then we went from there. But we also felt like it would draw people in if we could have really funny chapter titles and just kind of give people an indication that, these are works of serious literature that we're talking about, but we're going to talk about them in a fun way. Like another chapter title I kind of like was Bright Nights, Big Shitty Hangovers. Why picking up people at bars isn't the best route to romantic fulfillment or something like that. Anyway, we're really glad that you liked the chapter titles. Let's see. Sharon Berger asks, can we learn from experience or gain judgment, or will reading about others help? Let's see. So can we learn, I think the question is, can we learn from experience, or will reading about others help? And I think we kind of have to do both. What's that old adage? Like something like you can. I can't think of the old adage I'm trying to come up with, but I think we need to kind of hear lessons, read about different lessons, read about different people's experiences, and then have our own experiences as well, and eventually we'll sort of have a eureka moment. To go back to Howard's End again, had I not been out there in the dating trenches, trying to figure out my own, quirks and hang-ups and insecurities and fears, had I not been sort of dating a lot, seeing how different kinds of relationships worked and how I felt about them, had I not been doing all of that, I don't think I would have read Howard's End and said, right, okay, this is a good lesson. And this relationship that I've just started, because I had just started a relationship when I began rereading Howard's End, I was able to say to myself, okay, you know what, maybe I should do like Margaret is doing. Maybe it's okay if I do like Margaret is doing. Maybe it'll work out well. I'm with this person I don't necessarily feel like is my quote-unquote soulmate. I don't necessarily feel like he's sort of the perfect guy for me, but he treats me really well and makes me feel really good and happy, and maybe if I can kind of give that amount of affection and consideration back to him, we can turn this into something really good, and I think we did for a while. So I think you need both, basically. So we're about to announce another 5 lucky winners who will get a copy of Much Ado About Loving and get to tell us what their favorite chapter titles are. So I think BookTrib is now doing the equivalent of rolling the big glass ball with all of the numbers in it, and we're about to see who wins the lottery. Maybe in the moment that we have here, I will talk about Queen Dido from Aeneas, one of my other favorite literary heroines. Here we have the winners, and they are Jeffrey Treaton, Robin F., Angie, Mina DeCaro, and Bam Bam. So that's exciting. Congratulations, and thank you for being interested in the book. I think we're just about done here, but Queen Dido basically has a oops, a casual relationship with Aeneas, and then is devastated when he just kind of walks off, tries to leave her without saying even goodbye. So even Queen Dido back in, before the days before BC, had experiences very similar to the kinds of experiences modern women are having. Okay, anyway, thank you very much. Bye.